the Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadik Amar Aleph. That's Zav Sharash Deirius. A Zav is a man that's Tameh. He could be a Zav that saw 2 Riyas, it could be a Zav that saw 3 Riyas. The difference is just if he has to bring a carbon on the 8th day. If he has 2 Riyas, is a sighting of an emission. So 2 Riyas, he has this Tumah, which makes him tummy for 7 days. On the 7th day, he can go to the mikveh. And that evening, he's tar. And if he would have seen a 3rd time, then on the 7th day, he still goes to the mikveh that evening, but the following day he needs to bring a carbon, the 8th day. He has an 8th day. 2 Riyas only has a 7th day. So the halacha is, the 7th day, since that evening, he's going to be tar. So no problem. They shecht for him on the 7th day. And everything is fine because that evening he's going to be able to eat. He goes to the mikveh, of course. Rosh Shalish. Let's say he saw 3 times. Now he has another halach. He has to bring a carbon. So on the 8th day you can shecht for him because he's going to bring his carbon, or maybe he brought his carbon already, and then it's fine. What about Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom? This is a woman that's a zava. So when a zava, she sees 3 times, she's called a zava gedola. It's 3 separate days. By a zav, it didn't have to do with days, it has to do with sightings. So let's say this zava, she saw 1 day. The following day she watches to see if she's going to see again. That's called a shemeres yom. She's watching 1 day corresponding to the 1 day that she saw. So every day that she sees, she waits 1 day. So she's a shemeres yom keneged yom. So on that day, you can shecht for her. She on the Shemeres Yom day. Why? Because she goes to the mikveh during the day, and that evening she's going to be tar if she doesn't see again. Same story. She sees 2 days in a row, so she only has to wait 1 day. On the 3rd day, she waits. She goes to the mikveh sometime during the day, and that evening she's tar. So perfect. Shechten Allah, they shecht for her b'shlishi on the 3rd day, because that evening she can eat from the Korban Pesach. V'hazava, let's say she's a Zava Gedola, that means she saw 3 days instead of 1 day or 2 days. She saw 3 days, consecutive days. Then she has to wait for the 7th day to go to the mikvah. She has to wait 7 clean days. She goes to the mikvah on the 7th day. And the following day, she has to bring a carbon. So they have to shecht her not on the 7th day, but on the day afterwards, on the 8th day. Rav Yehuda Rav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. Rav Yehuda is the famous student of Rav. He says, Sheichten v'zarken al tvol yom and kippurim ve'in sheichten v'zarken al tamisheret. A tvol yom, someone that went to the mikveh has to wait for nightfall. Mechusar kippurim, someone that didn't bring his sacrifices yet because he was tameh. For those 2 people, you can shech the Korban Pesach because right afterwards they'll become tar. That evening they'll be tar, or the Mechusar Kippurim will bring his karbanos, they'll be tar. However, for a Tamei Sheret, someone that touched a creature, for him you can't shech. That's a problem. What's the reason? I mean, it sounds like it should be the same story. He's Tamei. That evening he'll be tar. What's the problem? Why are we dividing this up? We'll see, the Gemara will explain. Ula says, Ula says no. Ula's arguing here on Rav, and he's saying that you can shecht for a tamei sheretz, and the logic would fit, because if, even though he's tamei, I can shecht, which you see that in other cases, and in the evening he'll be tar, and he'll be able to eat the Korban Pesach. So tamei sheretz is the same story. The Rav, the Gemara asks the obvious question: why, according to Rav, don't you shecht for someone that touched the sheretz, which is a creeping dead creature that gives off tumah? Someone that touched that, you don't shecht for him. But why not? If he went to the mikveh for anything else, let's say it was a carry, bal carry, he goes to the mikveh. That evening he's going to be tar. So here also, the tamei sheretz, go to the mikveh. That evening will be tar. So the Gemara answers mechusar tefillah. He didn't go to the mikveh yet. That's our whole problem. He didn't go to the mikveh. Well, the Tvul Yom, he didn't have sunset yet. You hear the comparison? This one didn't have sunset yet. That one didn't go to the mikveh yet. So you see they're both missing something. So, and you see that didn't seem to be a problem. So the Gemara says, well, that's not a good comparison because Shimshim and Mela Arba, the sun is going to set naturally. But going to the mikveh is not something that happens naturally. That he has to actually do. The Gemara says, well, we had cases where we said that on the 8th day you can shechper him because he's going to bring a sacrifice and it's going to be fine. Well, after he brings a sacrifice, he can eat from the Korban Pesach. So we're saying over here that we're comparing. We tried to compare someone that didn't go to the mikveh to the sun didn't set yet. We said, well, that's going to happen naturally. Not going to the mikveh is not natural. So, well, what about Mechusik Kippurim? That's not natural. And nevertheless, we said that it was fine to shechper him on the 8th day. What's the difference, bringing sacrifices versus going to the mikveh? Both of them you didn't do yet. And for the Mechusik, bringing the sacrifice, it was fine. And for going to the mikveh, it's not fine. The Gemara says, Shekani biyadei. He already has the sacrifices ready. It says, Tami sheretz nami, hari mikveh lefanov. So what? He has a mikveh ready. And you said that that's not fine. Dilma Pasha, maybe he's not going to go into the water. Maybe he's not going to give the sacrifices to the Kayan to slaughter. What's the difference? No, he did give them over. He gave them over already. So he gave them over. He brought them. Kudrav Shmaya, the Gemara says. The Amar Chazaka ain't bezin shel kain mind the misham matchich l'maisha b'shayfus. What Rav Shmaya said was that what you do is, if you have to bring sacrifices, you go to the Beis HaMikdash and you put this money into the pushkas that are there, and they take, it was like tokens probably. They take the kayanim, take it out, and for each one they bring the carbon that day. Now, there's a chazaka that the kainim are not going to leave anything over till the next day. Good workers. They're going to, everything that's handed in that day is going to be taken care of before they close up for the day. So that's what we're saying here. Mechusik Kippurim, he goes to the Beis HaMikdash. He puts his token or money into into those pushkas that they have over there. And there's a chazaka that the kainim are going to take care of it. It's fine. They can already shech the Korban Pesach for him because he's good to go. By the mikveh, though, maybe he himself is not going to end up going to the mikveh. That's a problem. So that's Rav's opinion. So it turns out, according to Rav midaraisa mechzichazi, Rabbanan the Gozerbe. Really, he would be fine. It's just a rabbinic decree that maybe it's going to be pesheya. Alamara amarav mitamen echen mem b'sheretz. We had a story with everyone being tamid. If everyone's tummy, we said that you can bring the Korban Pesach. So we added in a case. Let's say it's not everyone. It's not even the majority. It's 50-50. 50 are tummy, 50 are tar. What do you do then? So Rav came up with a solution. You metam him with the sheretz. One more person, you make tummy, then you have 51 to 49. And then, 1 second. According to Rav, someone that's tummy sheretz, midaraisa, can you shech for him? We were saying until now that midaraisa, yes, rabbinically no, dilma pasha. Maybe he's not going to go to the mikveh. So what does it help if midaraisa he's eligible? He should not go into the count to make that to change the statistics, change the numbers. Ella l'Rav midaraisa nami lechazi. We have to do a different pshat. If Rav says that you are matama one person with the sheretz in order to change the numbers, so then it must be midaraisa. When we spoke about Pesach Sheni, we spoke about that a man that's tamei nefesh. That means that he came in touch with a corpse. At what point was he in the purification process? So it says, if a man is tamei nefesh, the Gemara says, are we not dealing with that he already started the purification process and he's actually on the last day of it, and it's Erev Pesach. And nevertheless, you're not allowed to bring the carbon Pesach for him. He has to wait for Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara is going to ask where do you get this from? But right here, we're looking at a person that evening would have been tahar if he just waits for evening. And nevertheless, he waits for the Pesach Sheni. So you see, this is a source that
waiting for the evening or waiting for the mikvah.
He has to wait for the evening.
When does
he has to wait for the evening. And if it's Tommy Sheretz, also has to wait for the evening. He has to go to the mikveh and wait for the evening. But I don't know if he has to go, if the Tommy Mace has to go to the mikveh again. I don't know if that he has to. They sprinkle the water of the paraduma and then he'll be tahar that evening. I think it's considered a tzvul yaim. Okay, whatever the case is, both of them are going to be tahar that evening, and there's a strong comparison there. And we're seeing that you have to wait for the Pesach Sheni. Maybe you'll ask, how do you know that's the case? I mean, we just made up this case. That's what the Pesach Sheni is talking about, is that he's on his seventh day. Maybe he touched the corpse today. Yeah, there's other Gemaras that go through this, the calculation, which body was it, what it was. He's talking about Yosef bones, we're talking about the sons of Aaron, where this was said, because they died on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay. Sabala Kereb Yitzchak. Damar Tmei Meis Mitzvah Hayu. Shechal Shvi Shalem Berev Pesach. They were Tamei Meis Mitzvah. I don't know who it was. Someone died. Probably a Meis Mitzvah could mean a relative. Meis Mitzvah usually is you find a corpse somewhere and there's no one there to bury it. But that means that you become his relative with the responsibility to bury it. That relative responsibility to bury goes on that. But if you're actually a relative, then you have the original mitzvah of taking care of the. So, Shechal Shvi Shalem Lias Berev Pesach Shneim Avliach Lasses a Pesach Bayemahu. That's his proof. They weren't able to do the Pesach on this day. Bayemahu Udeini Achalasis. On this day, they weren't able to do it. Avalamachei Chelam Lasis. They could have done it tomorrow. So that's the raya that evening they would have been tar. And nevertheless, it says Pashof. So that means that Rav's Tommy Sheretz you can't check for the Carbon Pesach for him, even though that evening he'll be pure. That's Midiraisa. The source is from the law of Pesach Sheni. Tanan. We learned in the Mishnah. Zav Shirash de Riyas Sheikhel of B'Shvi. Two sightings of this emission by a Zav will require him to have 7 clean days. He goes to the mikvah on the 7th day. My love to Leitavol. Isn't it not that he didn't go to the mikvah yet? And we're saying that you can shecht for him. You see, you can shecht for someone that's Tamei Sheretz. In this whole business of maybe he's not going to go to the mikvah or whatever, we're talking about another person that didn't go to the mikvah, and you can shecht for him. Says Loi, the Tavel. He went to the mikvah already, and that's why you can shecht for him. Itavel my kamash malan. So what's the chiddush? Kamash malan, there is a chiddush. The afagav the mechus erev shemesh kamash malan the shimshim mela arva. Even though the sun didn't set yet.
That's what I was asking. So I was like, okay. So yeah,
but we know that the sun will naturally set, so you don't have to worry about it. Yeah. Yeah, if there's anxiety, like, will the sun set today? Yeah, don't worry. The sun's going to set. So you'll be fine, and you can shecht him. Hachinam mistabra. It's also logical. Midiktani seifa. We look one step further in the Brisa. It says Rosh Shalishrias. What happens if he had 3 sightings of this emission? This tumah. Then they have to wait till the 8th day. Okay. So if we say, we want a chiddush to come out of the second case. We don't want the chiddush to be in the first case, and then you ask the question, so why do you tell me the second case? You already told me the biggest chiddush you already said. You don't have to continue with that. So we want the first case to be less of a chiddush, and then the second case will be a bigger chiddush. So if we say that in the first case, 2 riyas, he went to the mikvah already. So then we have a chiddush, and on the second case we are 3 riyas, and he has to bring the carbon. So Istra. I could have thought Rosh they Rias Bishvi Hudlay Mechusar Maisa. I could have thought 2 Rias, he already went to the mikveh, he doesn't need any more action, then we understand why you're allowed to shecht for him. But what about Shmini? Aval Rosh Shalish Bishmini, the Mechusar Maisa, Mechusar Kippur, Mechusar Kapara. He has to bring a carbon. Loya, I would have thought that he can't shecht for such a person on the 8th day. Kamash Malan, the Chiddush is that even though he still needs a carbon, you can still shecht for him. The second case is a big Chiddush. He's Mechusar Maisa, you have to still do an action, and nevertheless we rely that it's going to be done. But if you say it differently, if you say that we're talking about the case, is that he's lost 2 riyas. He's on his 7th day, he didn't go to the mikveh yet. They're shechting the carbon Pesach. You say, don't worry about it, you can still shech, even though he didn't go to the mikveh yet. You already said the biggest chiddush. So Ra Shalish B'Shmini Lamali. So what chiddush do you have in saying about the 8th day? Hashti Yishlem Rosh Deirius B'Shvi Delay Tavel the Tami Malyo. If you say when he's mamish tami, he didn't go to the mikveh yet, you say you can shecht for him. Shechtina B'Zarkin Nalabe Ra Shalish. If he sees 3 riyas B'Shmini the Tavele B'Shvi, he already went to the mikveh. The Klisha Tumah, his tumah's already been weakened. He's in the middle of the process already. He's halfway tar. The only thing that's left is to bring the carbon. And nevertheless, we shechted already when someone was mamish tamei. Over here, you're going to have a like kolshkin the shechtin v'zarkin alevei for sure on the 8th day. There's no chiddush. Elalav shmamina rosh deirius b'shvid the shechtin aled the tavel. It must be that the first case was when he went to the mikveh already, and that's why we have a chiddush in the second case where he didn't bring his carbon. In other words, the first case was less of a chiddush, and so therefore there's a chiddush in the second case. If you increase the chiddush of the first case of the shtei riyas, then you're left with, what are you telling me about shalish riyas, where you went to the mikveh already, and you're telling me that you can still shecht? I don't need to know that. That was obvious. The Gemara says, "Lai, it doesn't have to be like that." Really, he didn't go to the mikveh yet, and it seems like the chiddush is in the first case, and there's no chiddush in the second case. But it's nevertheless necessary. Could have thought like this. When he sees 2 riyas, he didn't go to the mikveh yet. I would say that we trust him he's going to go to the mikveh and we can share. But if he saw 3 riyas and it's the 8th day, I know he went to the mikveh already. And he already gave the money to the pushka, the kainim are going to bring it. I know that. But it's really not up to him anymore. We would like it to be totally in his hands. Because he's handed it over to the kainim, we don't know the kainim are going to do it. So therefore, maybe we should say you can't shech the carbon for him. Kamashmalan Kid Rav Shmaya, that Rav Shmaya says there's a chazaka that the kainim always take care of things. You gave it over to them, you're good to go. That's the chiddush of the second case. It says v'hazava sheichtin, you can shech for a zava on the 7th day. On the 8th day, because she also needs a carbon. Tani Tana Kameda Ravada Barava. A Tana, someone that memorized Brises, teaches in front of Ravada Barava. Ravada Barava was a contemporary of Rava. V'hazava sheichtin aleh b'shvi shalom. Says that the Zava you shecht on the 7th day. That's a little bit of a problem because she didn't bring her carbon yet. You shecht the carbon Pesach, she's only on her 7th day, she can't eat it. She has to wait another day. Amalei Zava b'shvi shalom michazia. What's she going to do on the 7th day? She can't eat the carbon. She can't eat the carbon Pesach. She's missing her, she's supposed to bring a carbon the following day if she's a Zava. Not a Nida. So Zava is more out of ordinary bleeding. Even according to the opinion that says that you can shecht for someone that's tamei sheretz, they have to wait for nightfall. That's only someone that's tamei came in contact with the sheretz because they'll be fit that evening. They'll be able to eat the carbon pesach in time. But this woman, until tomorrow, when she brings her carbon, she's not fit. So this evening, she's not going to be able to eat the carbon pesach. What are they shechting for? Ema b'shmini. Ravada Barava tells this Tana, he says, adjust the brisa that you were reciting, adjust it to say that a zava you shecht on the 8th day for her. Pshita, that's obvious. She's already bringing her carbon. She should be fine that evening. I could have thought because she didn't actually bring the carbon yet. The chiddush is like Reb Shmaya says that once you give it over to the Kayanim, it's a chazaka that it's going to be taken care of. Ravina Amar Nida. Ravina switches it. He says we're actually dealing with a Nida. The difference between a Nida and a Zava is Nida, the blood is on time, and a Zava, the blood is not on time. There's 11 days in between periods where if she sees blood during those days, that's considered a Zav. 7, 11, like the store. 7 days of Nida, and then there's 11 days of Ziva. Now, and the halachas, the difference between a Nida and a Zava, a Nida is tummy for 7 days, no matter what, whether she sees blood, whether she doesn't see blood, during all 7. She had to see once, but then the rest of the 7 doesn't matter if she sees she's tummy for 7 days. And if she saw all 7, she's also only tummy for 7 days. She goes to the mikveh that evening and she's fine. A Zava has to wait 7 clean days. The blood has to stop, have sektara, wait 7 clean days, and then she can go to the mikveh. A Zava can go to the mikveh by day, a Nida can go to the mikveh by night. So, Ravina Nida Tana Kamei, Vahanida Sheikhtan La B'Shvi. You can shecht for a Nida on the 7th day. Amalei Nida B'Shvi Michazia. Is a Nida going to be acceptable on the 7th day? You see, there's a little bit of an issue here. The issue is that a Nida doesn't go to the mikveh during the day. So she doesn't have the nightfall that comes after the mikveh. She has to go to the mikveh at night. So when does she have her nightfall? The nightfall of the 8th day. What happens is she's considered a Tvil Yaim until she has a nightfall. Now, it doesn't really affect her being with her husband, being a Tvil Yaim, Tevelas Yaim. But for eating a sacrifice, it would affect. So is she fit on the 7th day? When you say that a Tami Sheretz is you can shecht for, well, that's because he or she goes to the mikveh, and that evening they're going to be tar. But neither Lord to the Shviyu, the Tavla, she only goes to the mikveh after nightfall, after Shkia. And Ad Shmini Dav Deher Shemesh Leichazia, she can't eat a carbon until the nightfall of the 8th day. Elaima B'Shmini. Say that you can shecht for Nida on the 8th day. That's what the Gemara says, well, Pshita. She went to the mikveh the day before. Now she's already tar. While she waits for Herib Shemesh. Pashta ma'azava the mechasra kapara sheikhtam zarkim b'shmini. What's the chiddush? A zava that still needed the carbon, you said was acceptable on the 8th day. A nida that doesn't need a carbon, nida the mechasra kapara. Chichle meimar the shechtin v'zarkin nala. You have to tell me that you can shecht for her. The Gemara says no. Nida it's chichle. There is still a chiddush. It's the opposite chiddush, but there is a chiddush. Hakamashmalan b'shmini in b'shvi lai. The chiddush is that it's only the 8th day, not the 7th day. We were looking, the chiddush should be that it's acceptable. Now we're saying no, the chiddush is that it's only acceptable here, not the chiddush is the chumrah of it, that it's not acceptable on the 7th day. Kidetanya, as we start in the Brisa, kol chai b'tfilas tfilasim b'yoyim, nida b'yeledes tfilasim b'layla. Usually, someone that's chayiv tefillah that has to goes to the mikveh, goes to the mikveh by day, is allowed to go to the mikveh by day, but not a nida or a woman that gave birth. Yeah, what happens in places where you can't access the mikveh at night, you can only access it by day. So they would usually tell you to go to the mikveh on the 8th day, the day later. Even though our women are a mix between a nida and a zava, that's why they wait 7 clean days always. But nevertheless, they would push it off unless with the special exceptions. They won't do that. So the Tanya was starting by maybe they can go to the mikveh during the day. 7 days she's a nida. Tia benidasa kol shiva v'yoledes 7 days she's in her nida. She can't go to the mikveh at all during the day. She has to wait for nightfall. And the yoledes is compared, a woman that gave birth is compared to the nida. Okay. A new Mishnah. Someone that's very in mourning. It's the first day of the morning. Someone that's uncovering a mound of rubble. There could be a corpse underneath. And also someone that they promised him that he's going to get out of prison today. Someone that's ill, or someone that's elderly. That they're able to, nevertheless, even though they're ill and they're elderly, but they can still eat a kazayas. So what's the halacha with all of these people? It's Erev Pesach. He's an oinen. He's digging up rubble. He's promised to get out of prison. He's expecting. So, sheichten aleim. You can shech the Korban Pesach for them in the hope that everything's going to work out. Al kulam ein sheichten aleim b'fnei atzim. All of them, you can't shech the Korban Pesach for them themselves. Now, we want the Korban Pesach to be 100% sure that it's going to be valid. If they're the only ones there, then everything could go wrong, possibly, potentially. We don't want that to happen. So we need to have other people that are involved in that Korban Pesach, that the Korban Pesach is still kosher, even if things go wrong. Maybe it's going to be possible. So therefore, if a psul does happen, and everything was acceptable at the time of the shechita, and the psul happened later, and it turns out they can't eat it. So P'tur Milas Pesach Sheni, the Korban Pesach was still acceptable because at the time of the shechita and the zrika, everything was good, and they can't eat it. Okay, whatever. They don't have to make the Pesach Sheni. Chutz min hafakech begal, except for the fellow that was digging up the rubble to check if there's people that died underneath. That's a problem, because when you find out after the shechita that there was someone that was stuck underneath, turns out that he was tamei at the shechita. So that's a different story. So shehu tamei mitchilas because he was tamei before. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I wonder if it's Rabba bar Rav Huna. The next case is going to be Rabba bar Chana. Whatever it is, Rabba, some son of so and so, says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Leishanu ela bebeis asurim da'akum. When did we say that you can't shech for this person alone, or for this group of people alone? That's because he's in a non-Jewish prison, and we don't trust. They said they're going to let him out. We don't know what's going to happen. But if it would be a Jewish prison, this is very interesting because usually we assume that Jews didn't have prisons, and we assume that the prison system is not a Jewish system. But here, apparently, we see that it is, for different reasons. Rashi says maybe they were forcing him to divorce a wife that he wasn't supposed to be married to, or he owes money, or they're waiting to see if someone survives a fight, and so they're holding this person to see what's going to happen. Okay, so sheichten, if it's a Jewish prison, then sheichten v'pniatzim kivim davtechinu mapikle. Once they said that they're going to let him out, we trust that they're going to keep their word. The Jewish people, even if the prison guards. The ksiv sheiris Yisrael yasu avlav leida b'chasav. The Jewish people don't do sins and they don't speak falsehood. Let's say there's a non-Jewish prison that's in Yerushalayim, and they're not going to let him out. But you know what? If he's within the area of Yerushalayim, he's before Beis Pagi, before that the walls of Beis Pagi, you can still shech for him. My time, after the atmulei, the amtulei, v'achalei. Maybe you can go over to the prison with pieces of the Korban Pesach, and you pass it through the bars, and you give it to him to eat. And he's in the area that he's allowed to eat. He's in prison, but he's still in Yerushalayim. So that would be interesting mivtzayim for Chabad. They get the names of everyone in the prison, and they shech the Korban Pesach for them, and they go bring it. They distribute it on Erev Pesach. Okay, Lafika Chamera Chulu. Turns out is that if it happened to be that it was pasul, so then they don't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. Amar Rabba bar Bachana Mar Rabbi Yochanan leishanu ala gal ogel. They said that, however, the person that was digging up the rubble, we say that he's different because it could be that he that even if they find out later that there was a corpse, no, when they find out later there was a corpse, he does need to bring a Pesach Sheni because he probably became tummy before because he was digging it up the whole time. It was tummy before the Shechita. The Shechita wasn't there. But that's only, Rabbi Barbachana says, and that's only by a galagel, a round pile of rubble. Aval galara, but if it's a long wall, let's say, and he starts on one end, and they find out towards the evening, that there is a corpse underneath. Patam Pesach Sheni. He doesn't need to bring a Pesach Sheni. Why? The rubble that he was digging up before the Shechita was tar. The corpse was found at the other end. That didn't make him tummy. He was probably tar at the time of Shechita. Tanya Namihachi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shmuel usually. Rabbi Shmuel b'nei Rabbi Yechim Eimer mepacheach begal itim pater itim chayev. Someone that's digging up rubble, sometimes he's pater from Pesach Sheni, sometimes he's chayev in the Pesach Sheni. It depends on the position of the stones. Ketza galagel, if it's a round pile of rubble, nimtzas tuma tachtav, then he's chayev, because we say that it was already tummy from before the shechita. The whole carbon he wasn't involved in that carbon. So he has to bring a Pesach Sheni. Gal arach, but if it was a long pile of rubble, nimtzas tuma tachtav pater ematar hayibasashchita, you find tuma underneath one end. He was probably tar. He was digging up the other end before the shechita. By the time he got over there, the shechita was already. He can't eat it. Granted, he can't eat the carbon Pesach, but the carbon was brought at a time when he was eligible, and so therefore he doesn't need to bring a Pesach Sheni. Ein sheichten as a Pesach ala yachid. You can't shech the carbon Pesach just for one individual. Let's say I have a big appetite. I'm not a social person. I don't want to be with anyone. I'm going to have my own Pesach. You're not allowed to do that. There has to be someone else there, a group. The Rabbi Yehuda. It's the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah. What do you say about the students of Rabbi Yehuda? 6 students could fit under one talis, I think it says. They must have been friendly. So anyway, but he learns it from Pesachim, not it's not his social ideas. Rabbi Yossi says no, it's acceptable to shech the carbon Pesach for one person. However, if you have 100 people but they can't eat, so then that's not good enough. That's not acceptable. They have to be able to eat. Yeah. What does it mean? That means all 100 together can't eat a kazayas. But if, let's say, all 100 together they could eat a kazayas, that would be good. It doesn't mean that each one needs to be I'm not sure. From Rashi, it looks like Rashi says, Meya be'inichilim lechol kazayas being kulam in Sheikh Namalei, which that's interesting. The Rashash has a question on this Rashi. Let's see on the bottom. He asks, 1 second, not a single individual there was eligible for the carbon Pesach. That's called shaloi liyoifla. You shechted it for people that are not eligible to eat it because they weren't able to eat it kazayas. That's a problem. Yes, Akash on Rashi. Okay. Then we say you don't make a group from women, slaves, and children. We'll see what that means. Doesn't mean all 3 together. Each one separately. We have to just wait for the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanon. We'll start in the Brisa. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get this from? That you can't shech the carbon Pesach just for one individual. It says sharecha. But if you stop short in the pasuk when you're reading it, it says you can't shech the carbon Pesach for one. In one. Now, what it actually says is you can't shech the carbon Pesach in one of your gates, which means not in the Beis Hamikdash. But if you stop short in the pasuk, it says in one. That means that you can't shech the carbon Pesach for one person. If one person, he can eat, so you shech for him. The whole problem is if they can't eat. Is not as dramatic in this brisa. He says 10 people and they can't eat, you can't shech for them. The Gemara says, 1 second. That was the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. He argues on Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, for one person, it's not good. Rabbi Yossi says, one person, it is good. You can check the Karban Pesach just for one. Rabbi Yossi, what does Rabbi Yossi do with Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk? It says, Rabbi Shimon. He's using that pasuk for something else, and that's why he doesn't learn it to tell me that you can't shech it for one. Rabbi Shimon says, the Tanya, Rabbi Shimon, say, let's say someone does shech this Karban Pesach, but he shechs it in his backyard on his private bama. Bama is a personal mizbeach. So that, how do you know that he violated a negative prohibition? You're not allowed to shech the Karban Pesach in one of your gates. What about during the times in history when the Beis Hamikdash wasn't there and the Mishkan Shila wasn't there? That it was in the interim, in between those times, they were allowed to shech the karbanos on the bama. So Talmud ba'achad sharecha. Over there, that was acceptable. It says in one of your gates. That's only when we had a single gate for all of Klal Yisrael. That means when there was a central location for everyone to bring their karban. So then it was acceptable. If they didn't, then it was not acceptable to bring it anywhere else. But if they didn't have a single location, one location for everyone to go, then it was fine. That's what Rabbi Yossi does with Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk, and therefore it leaves him with that you're allowed to shech the Karban Pesach just for one person. You don't have a pasuk that tells you not. The Rabbi Yehuda Haminale. Where does Rabbi Yehuda know that you can't shech on a bama? It says Tarti Shamet Mineh. He learns two things from that pasuk. Rabbi Yossi Mimai Delahachi Bekam Rabbi Shimon. How do you know that how does Rabbi Yossi know that you have to use the pasuk for Rabbi Shimon says, maybe it's coming to tell me ba'achad also that you can't shech it for one person. Amalach, Rabbi Yossi responds, don't let that enter your mind. A man, according to his eating, that's how you shech. That you shecht for according to how many people there are. But the expression is ish, which is one man. So you see, it says clearly that you can shecht for a man. Later on, we're going to use this pasuk again. That's going to discuss what about for women. But right here, Rabbi Yossi tells me that you can shecht for an individual based on the pasuk ish lefiyach. Rami le Ravukva Barchinana mi Parishna. Ravukva Barchinana from Parishna asked the question to Rava. Miyam Rabbi Yehuda in Sheikhna Pesach ala Yachid. Rabbi Yehuda really says he can't shech the Karban Pesach for an individual. Baraminu is a contradiction. Isha Barishan Sheikhna b'pnei atzma. A woman, can you shech the Karban Pesach for a woman? So if it depends, Pesach Rishon or Pesach Sheni. Pesach Rishon, you can shech for a woman. B'Sheni, but not for a woman on this for Pesach Sheni unless she's secondary to the rest of the group. She shouldn't be the only one there. The Rabbi Yehuda. That's the words of Rabbi Yehuda. But now we have a little bit of a problem. Rabbi Yehuda said you cannot let a shecht for an individual. He said Pesach Rishon you can shecht for a woman. 1 second, that's an individual too. So, and it's a bigger chiddush, and it's a contradiction now. Amalei leitem b'fnei atzma b'fnei atzman. You didn't get the suffix correct. A woman, you can't shecht for them. For Pesach Sheni. For Pesach Rishon, yeah. But for them, not for her. It's not b'fnei atzma, it's b'fnei atzman. Okay, that answers up Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei miyavdin chabur shekol anashim. 1 second. And you're never allowed to make a group. And for Pesach Rishon, we said Pesach Rishon you're allowed to shech for women, not women, but women. We said 1 second. The Mishnah says you can't make a group of women. But my love, nashim l'chadaya, v'avadim l'chadaya, k'tanim l'chadaya. In all of those people, you can't make a group of each one individually. In other words, you can't make just women, just slaves, just. The Gemara says, Amalei Lai. Says, no, that's not the pshat. That's not the pshat in the Mishnah. Nashim v'avadim k'tanim, it goes together. Nashim v'avadim. You can't make a group of women and slaves. Mishum tiflis. We don't know what they're going to do. Women together with the slaves. We don't trust the slaves with the women. So the immoral conduct. So that you can't. It's not the women alone. You can make a group of women. Women's cover Pesach, being led by Rebbitzin. That would be perfectly acceptable for Pesach Rishon according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ketanim v'avadim, and you also can't mix children with the slaves. That's what we're also worried about. Mishum pritzusa. We're worried about what they're going to do with the young boys. That could be homosexual activity that they may do. Okay, so but each one independently was fine. Gufa. We learned before Isha Brisha Sheikhtan Ala B'fnei Atzma. We adjusted it to B'fnei Atzman. B'sheni Yosenes Tfei Lachem Div Rabbi Yehuda. The first the Pesach Rishon, the women can make their Korban Pesach alone, but not Pesach Sheni. They have to join in with others. That's the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi Omer Isha B'sheni Sheikhtan Ala B'fnei Atzma Vein Tzarich Lem Rishon. Rabbi Yosi says no. You can shaft for a woman in both in the second one and the first one. Reb Shimon Omer Isha B'rishon Eisnes Tfei Lachem B'sheni Ein Sheikhtan Kalika. So Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yosi are the extremes. Reb Shimon says you can't shaft for a woman alone, for women alone, in Pesach Rishon, and for sure not for Pesach Sheni. They can only be secondary to the men. And in Pesach Sheni, you don't do it at all. But even Pesach Rishon, they're just secondary to the men. Rabbi Yosi says women get the first Pesach and the second Pesach even independently. And Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. Pesach Rishon independent, Pesach Sheni only together with the men. Of the three opinions, Reb Shimon is the most exclusive with excluding the women. Rabbi Yosi is the most inclusive of the women. And Rabbi Yehuda is Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni, is mixes. But my kamiflagi, what is this machlekes? What is the source? Rabbi Yehuda savar b'michsas nefashis. Rabbi Yehuda says, it says in the pasuk, according to the amount of people, nefashis, afilu nashim. That includes women. Women could have their own group. So why is it only, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only Pesach Rishon? It says ksiv cheta yisa ha'ishahu. What does it say? When do you bring the Pesach Sheni? Well, if someone didn't bring the Pesach Rishon, he brings a Pesach Sheni. If he doesn't, it says cheta yisa ha'ishahu. He incurs his sin. He carries his sin. But the pasuk says ha'ishahu. That man. That means that it's only men. Hahu ish. I'm sorry. Ish in ishalai. Only a man, not a woman. Women don't bring Pesach Sheni. If you say, well, so why is she joining into a group of the Pesach Sheni? If you just said that she doesn't bring the Pesach Sheni. It says Ahani kachol chuchas Pesach l'tzvei ba'alma. We have a pasuk that says that the Pesach Sheni is done according to the same halachas, the same laws of the Pesach Rishon. That pasuk includes women. But I also have a pasuk that excludes the women. So the way we resolve that is we say, well, you exclude the women from doing it on their own, but they can still be included in a group of men with their families. Rabbi Yosi, my time, what's the reason for Rabbi Yosi to exclude women entirely from Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni? Pesach Rishon, they can join in as a group, together with a group of men, but they can't do it alone. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yosi is the opposite. I was just explaining Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosi says that women can do both Rishon and Sheni. It says b'michsas nefashis. That includes women. They're also souls. Rafiluisha. Siv Pesach Sheni. B'nichsa nefesh ha'im Yisrael. Nefesh rafilu nashim. It says nefesh. That they're also a soul. So the women can do Pesach Sheni as well. So what is it? Why does it say that if he doesn't, then that man will carry the sin? Lemute katan mikaris. It means only a man, but not a child. Child doesn't get kares. Okay, so he uses that pasuk to tell me the opposite, not to exclude women, but to tell me to exclude children. Reb Shimon ksiv b'rishon vish. What about Reb Shimon? It says, oh, I'm sorry, not what about. Reb Shimon's explanation is like this: ksiv b'rishon ish. It says by the first Korban Pesach ish. Where does it say that? That we have to see. Ish in ishalai, only a man, but not a woman. So that means a woman is excluded even from Pesach Rishon. So then why is she allowed to join into a group? The pasuk that says that according to the number, that will help for that she can join into a group. What about the second one? Let her join into a group. It says, Ish in ishalai. I have a pasuk that excludes him from the Pesach Sheni. The man will carry his sin. That means only the man. What is it excluding? If it's from an obligation, if it's hatzlacha, safe travels. If it's from the chiyuv, hashta b'rishon lai b'sheni mibai, she never had a chiyuv. She didn't have a chiyuv even on the first Pesach. You're going to tell me that she doesn't have a chiyuv on the second one. She didn't have any chiyuv at all. Elalav mitvela means from the group, that she doesn't join into a group with the Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara asks the basic question: where did Reb Shimon get that it says only men by the Pesach Rishon? My ish to come Reb Shimon. Where did Reb Shimon says it says ish by Pesach Rishon? Ish where it says that a man would take for his household a lamb, a humi by Leila Reb Yitzchak. That we use for something else. Damar ish zaycha vein katan zaycha. Uses that when you're sending a messenger to send to shech the Korban Pesach, you can't send the katan. The katan can't be a shliach to shech the Korban Pesach. Ve'ela mei ish lefi achlei. You should remember this pasuk because this is what Rabbi Yossi used before to tell me that you can shech for an individual. It was a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, can you shech for an individual? Now, Rabbi Yossi had a proof that you can from the pasuk ish lefi achlei. Now we're using ish lefi achlei for Rabbi Shimon to tell me that only men can have the Korban Pesach Rishon alone, but not women. Women can't have it alone. It says ish lefi achlei. The Gemara says 1 second. Amid Rabbi Yossi savalak Reb Shimon. Before you said that Rabbi Yossi holds of Reb Shimon, Rabbi Yossi used this pasuk. He used the pasuk to tell me that only that you can even shecht for an individual. And he says, what does he do with Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk? He held like Reb Shimon. What did Reb Shimon hold? That you can't shecht that ba'achad means that on a bamas yachid, you can't shecht it on a private altar. So if Rabbi Yossi holds a Reb Shimon, then Reb Shimon nami savalak Rabbi Yossi. Reb Shimon probably holds a Rabbi Yossi also. They're actually contemporaries, students of Rabbi Akiva. What's Reb Shimon doing? Telling me ish lefi achlei, telling me that it excludes women. He's probably telling me that you can shech the Korban Pesach for a single person. That's what Rabbi Yossi said. And Rabbi Yossi holds a Reb Shimon. Shimon probably holds a Rabbi Yossi, which means the pasuk was already used. Amalach and came nichtav rachmana lefi achlei. If he just wanted to tell me for an individual, it just needed to say lefi achlei, which would mean for him. According to its maybe. My ish shamat mini tarti. The word ish is coming to tell me that two things. One, that women are excluded from having their own Korban Pesach, and also they can shecht for an individual. Rabbi Lazar said that a woman has to bring is obligated in the first Korban Pesach Rishon, and when it comes to Pesach Sheni, that's only voluntary, and it pushes off Shabbos. The Gemara says 1 second. Before you get into who says that, first figure out what that means. Irishus, Shabbos, if it's voluntary, how does it push off Shabbos? That's impossible. The second Korban Pesach for a woman that missed the first one, that's voluntary. The first one is an obligation and it pushes off Shabbos. Come on, who does that go like? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yechanan. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda, period. Goes like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds Rabbi Yehuda holds that a woman is obligated in Pesach Rishon, but not in Pesach Sheni. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Ein Eisen Chabura Shekula Gerim Shemi Yedak Vayvil De Psul. You can't make a group that's only converts because they may end up being too strict about it, and they're going to claim that it's puzzle. They're going to say, "Oh, this went wrong, that went wrong." Yeah, this is like that joke. How many Bali Tshuva does it take to change a light bulb? The answer was, they're not sure if it's allowed. So here, what's happening is we're afraid that they're going to come up with chumras, the converts, and they're going to say that it's puzzle. We don't want it to be puzzle. You have to be balance it out. Yeah, Taisus is a little surprised by this pshat. He thinks that maybe they're gonna mess it up by not knowing the laws perfectly. But nevertheless, over here, this is what it says, that they're gonna be over strict, right? Yeah. What did they say? The Rebbitzin says, don't let her husband in the kitchen, he's gonna trafe it up. Because for her, she has all the chumras, and the rabbi is giving all the leniencies based on this shita and that shita. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Pesach, Matzah, Mar, Brish, and Chayva, Mikan, Ve'elach, Rishus. Pesach, Matzah, Mar, those three things that we're familiar with from Rabban Gamliel, that we have to mention. Those three things, the actual Korban Pesach, the eating of the matzah, and the Marar, are an obligation for Pesach Rishon, but they're an obligation for the first day of Pesach, which is, of course, Pesach Rishon. And after that, the other 6 days, in Eretz Yisrael, 6 days, that's just Rishus. That's just voluntary. Reb Shimon Aimer, Banashim Chayva, Banashim Rishus. Shimon says, for men, it's an obligation. For women, it's voluntary. Wait, 1 second. Hey, Koi, what are you talking about when you said it's voluntary? Ilema Pesach. If you're saying it's voluntary for the Korban Pesach, Pesach calls Shiva Miyaka, what? You bring a Korban Pesach every one of the days of Pesach. It's only 1 day, and it's Erev Pesach, and you eat it that night. There's no 7 Korban Pesach. It's not how you do it. It's 1 Korban Pesach. What are you saying? It's voluntary the rest of Pesach. Bella matzah marar. It must be talking about matzah marar. That the matzah and marar is voluntary. You can eat matzah and marar the rest of Pesach. Ema seifa, but let's read further. Reb Shimon Aimer, Banashim Chayva, Banashim Rishus, that for men it's an obligation, but not for women. Women it's voluntary. Lastly, Reb Shimon Adamar Rabbi Lazar. Reb Shimon doesn't hold that for women it's an obligation. Rabbi Lazar says clearly, Nashim Chayaves Ba'achilas Matzah Dvar Torah. Women are obligated in eating matzah. Don't eat chametz. 7 days you eat matzah. Anyone that's obligated, that's commanded not to eat chametz, has the obligation to eat matzah. Well, that's the case. Women are only exempt from time-bound positive commands. They're not allowed to commit any negative prohibitions. If that's the case, they're not allowed to eat chametz. And Rabbi Lazar says anyone that's not allowed to eat chametz is obligated to eat matzah. Reb Shimon's coming and saying that women don't have to eat matzah. But 1 second, if they're connected to the prohibition of chametz, then they have the obligation of matzah. So what is this price talking about? Where Reb Shimon says women it's voluntary. Pesach matzah marar b'rishon chayva mikan ve'elach b'rishus. Pesach matzah marar is an obligation on the Pesach Rishon. And after that, the Matzah Marar is talking about the rest of Pesach. The Pesach is talking about Pesach Rishon. Reb Shimon argues, he says that Pesach is an obligation only for men. Pesach ba'anashim chayva b'anashim rishus. But for women, it's not an obligation; it's voluntary, even Pesach Rishon. Okay. So Reb Shimon is coming and arguing just on the Pesach part, and the Mikan ve'elach is not even going on the Pesach part. The Mikan ve'elach is going on the Matzah Mar. Okay, now we have a mission that says Einain, which we mentioned before, an Einain that you're allowed to shecht for him. Now we say an Einain taiva va'ichlas b'schei la'erev. An Einain is someone that's an intense morning, the first day of the person passed away. He goes to the mikveh and he eats the Korban Pesach that evening. Avaloi Bekachim, but he can't eat any other sacrifice, just the Korban Pesach. Hashimei al Mesa, someone that's called a Shmua, probably Shmua Rechaita. I don't know. He hears that his a relative passed away, so he's supposed to have 1 day of mourning. That day of mourning, the Shmua Rechaita, or he's considered an Einin. He's considered Einin for that day, but what's going to be is that evening he's going to be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. But Malakit Layatzamis, if they collect the bones of a parent, they used to bury the body in the ground. Then several years later, they would collect the bones after the flesh decayed, and they would put it into a container, and they would put it into a family part of the wall or something in a cave. They would keep it there. That was the old custom. So, but on the day that they would collect the bones, that would be considered a day of mourning. Toivel va'eichel b'kachim. These people can be toivel and eat not only Korban Pesach, but they can even eat other kachim as well, because these types of mourning is only rabbinic, and so therefore they can even eat other things as well, other sacrifices. That whether you don't have the Korban Pesach, we're going to be lenient for an einin because of it's how strong it is. But an einin, other sacrifices he can't eat, because a real einin, that's aninus is deraisa. But for the other types of einin, will even be lenient for other sacrifices. Gershin eskaya berev Pesach. Yeah, there's a big rush. It's Pesach is coming, and this fellow has been learning for months. He wants to. I don't want to miss out on the Korban Pesach. They end up doing the bris and the mila, tefillah, whatever on erev Pesach. He has to bring a carbon as well. So he goes to the mikveh and eats his Korban Pesach. It's that evening. You do it all fast, rushed conversion and everything. Sorry, Basil says you have to wait 7 days until you can bring a carbon, because you're tummy. It's as if you came out of a grave, and you have to be sprinkled on the third day and on the 7th day from the paraduma when someone converts. My time. What's the reason for eating the Korban Pesach that evening? Because Aninus lasts for 1 day. That intense mourning was only for 1 day. We learned this by Aaron. That Aaron was allowed to eat from those sacrifices that by the inauguration offering. But that evening for everyone is only rabbinic. Gabi Pesach, when it came to the Korban Pesach, they didn't say that we have to keep the rabbinic law of Aninus by night. It's because the Korban Pesach is so strict, there's kares, so that overrules the rabbinic law of Aninus, which is the rabbinic law would be the night after the burial, or maybe it's even before the burial, but it's the first day that the person passed away. And the biblical law of Aninus is just the first day, before nightfall. So to eat another sacrifice, that's a positive command. And since there's a rabbinic law of Aninus by night, that first night, the intense mourning, so they don't eat other sacrifices that night. It's only the Korban Pesach that's so strict that it pushes off the rabbinic law. Hashimei al Mesa, if someone hears that a relative passed away, and etc. What are you saying? That you can shech the Korban Pesach for someone that collected the bones of his relative, and he's going to be able to eat it that evening. You have to sprinkle the water of the paraduma. It doesn't mean that he was the one that was collecting the bones. The bones were in the grave. They take it out, but he wasn't doing it. It was the grave diggers that take it out. They take it out. They put it into that container, and he's only tummy because that day is considered a day of. It's not tummy. He's considered an einin for that day because that day is a day of mourning when they transfer the bones. Gershon Eskayer, convert that converted. Yeah, all the commentators discuss. He's called a convert even before he converts because he has the soul of a convert. Gershon Eskayer. Amar Rabba Bar B'Chanan Rabbi Yechanan Machlekes Ba'aral Nachri the Beisil Sabri Gezer Shem Yitmal Lashana Haba V'Yemer Shtaken Milei Tavalti V'Chalti Achshav Nami Yatval V'Eichel L'Yada Shtaken Nachri Avlei Mekabel Tama Achshav Yisrael Mekabel Tama. We're explaining the opinion of Beisil here. Beisil says that when someone converts, we don't let him bring the Korban Pesach on the day that he converted. Why? Because it could be that he came in contact with impure things. Let's say a corpse. Now, a non-Jew that comes in contact with a corpse does not become Tamei. A Jew would become Tamei, but a non-Jew doesn't become Tamei. Now he converted. And right away he brought the Korban Pesach. Because there was no Tumah. Right? That's what could have been. Beisil doesn't like this. The following year, maybe he's going to be Tamei. And he's going to say that, well, last year I did it and it was no problem. So we don't want him to have that thought. It's like a bad training. So what we do is we say after the conversion he has to wait 7 days. That way the following year he's going to realize that if he became tummy he has to wait 7 days. Bishami says we don't make that kazera. This is interesting that Bishami seems to be more lenient. Aval Yisrael, this is Rabbi Bar B'Chana talking in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. But if it's just a Jewish child or someone that was not a child, someone that's Jewish, that didn't have a circumcision yet, everyone would have given Beisil holds, you do the circumcision, for whatever reason there was a delay, and you do the circumcision, and you can eat the Korban Pesach. We don't make a gzeira, oh, this person had a bris today because it was his conversion, he has to wait 7 days. So the Jewish person also has a bris, he has to wait 7 days. We don't extend it like that. Tani Nami Hachi was also taught in the Brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar says, Tosefta has another version. Reb Elazar bar Tzadok. There's no machlekes Beisham Beisil if it's a Jewish person that's having his bris on Erev Pesach, that he can eat the Korban Pesach that evening. So what are they arguing about? Al Oral Nachri, we're talking about a non-Jew that's having a circumcision. Bishami says there's no decree, and you're able to just do the circumcision and you can eat the Korban Pesach. Beisil says no, you have to wait 7 days because of the tumah that could be there for the following year, and so there's that gzeira. Now, just one point is that any person that has a member of his household that didn't have a circumcision, the whole household can't have the Korban Pesach. It has to be everyone in the household was circumcised, including, I think it means including the servants as well. I think so. I don't know. Okay, Amar Rava. Rava says he puts these into categories. We're dealing with rabbinic law. We're dealing with the biblical law of the Korban Pesach. Does the biblical law override all rabbinic law? So Rava puts it like this. He says, Aral, Hazav, Ismail, Hamidu Debreim b'makom kares. The rabbinic law is so strong that it pushes off the Korban Pesach. They can't do the Korban Pesach because of the rabbinic laws that are in place. By three things: by an Aral, someone that wasn't circumcised, Hazah, sprinkling, and the Ismail, the knife, bringing the knife that's used, scalpel, it's used for the circumcision on Shabbos, even though that may be only a rabbinic law of how to get it, a rabbinic prohibition. Einin and Metzora Beis HaPras, which are also rabbinic laws, of Einin, which is Einin by night. There's rabbinic Metzora. You have to see what that is in Beis HaPras. There's a place where there's a lost grave. The rabbi said that you push off our decrees. That's what they said, in order to have the Korban Pesach. Aral, let's go through the cases that Rava brings. Aral Hadamran. Remember, we said that someone that has the circumcision, Beisil says that for the conversion, Beisil says you have to wait 7 days. He can't bring the Korban Pesach, even though really he just became Jewish. He should bring the Korban Pesach, his first mitzvah. But no, the rabbis have that in place. He doesn't bring it. Azah, what about the sprinkling? We learned before, the Shabbos also, but also before, that Hazah is a shvus, sprinkling the paradim on Shabbos on someone is a rabbinic prohibition because it's misaken. It looks like you're fixing. But if the person needs it, you still don't do it. Even if the person needs it, you still don't do it, and he's not going to be able to bring the carbon pesach. There was a discussion over there with Rabbi Eliezer. Ismail, the scalpel, the tiny same maybe in a siddur chisham, kachim maybe in a siddur chagos siddur chatzos siddur kafifs. You can't even bring it through these other ways, which are only rabbinic laws. They're it's like a carmelis, but you don't bring it through them. You can't bring the knife on Shabbos, so that the person should have the circumcision to be allowed to bring the carbon pesach. You can't do that. Let's go to the other three where we said you are allowed to. Einain hadamran. Said an einain by night is only rabbinic, and therefore you can eat the carbon pesach. Mitzayra mayu. What's the case of mitzayra? The Tanya was taught in the Brayso mitzayra shchal shmini shlei berev pesach. Mitzayra, that his 8th day is on erev pesach, just in time. He's going to be able to bring the sacrifices, and they're going to put the blood, whatever, on his fingers, on his thumbs. Bara keri by bayim. That day becomes tameh with tumas keri. Now there's 3 locations. There's the Azara, which is called Machane Shechina. There's the Harabayas, which is called Machane Levia, and then there's Yerushalayim, which is called Machane Yisrael. A Mitzayra is not allowed to go after he's tahar. He's not allowed to go into Machane Shechina until he's perfectly tahar, until he brings his karbanas. But there's an exception where he's allowed to put in his thumbs. Balkari is not allowed to go into Machane Levia either. So this person is really just about to go into, so he really can't be on the Harabayas. He's just about to go on the Harabayas to get his sacrifices done. This Mitzayra Erev Pesach, where everything worked out, it becomes a carry. So, carry by Yom. So we say Teva Vaychel, Amr Chacham Af Pishat Tvol Yom Ein Nichnas. Even though tell him that he goes to the mikveh, and that night he's going to eat the carbon Pesach. How does he get his sacrifices done with his thumbs and inside? They have to put the blood on his thumb. So Tvul Yom is not allowed to walk into that area. Zenichnas, he's allowed to go in. Mutav Yavi Yasei. Sheish Bekaris, Vitcha Asei, Shein Bekaris. The prohibition that he has to stay out of the Machane Levia is a positive command, where he's supposed to be outside the camp. So that's not, that command doesn't have a karis on it. However, the karis of the carbon Pesach, of missing out on the carbon Pesach, that positive command has karis, that pushes it off. Rabbi Yochanan says it's really not even a positive command there, that he shouldn't be out of the Harabayas. That Yeshaphat stood with the congregation of Yehuda in Yerushalayim in the house of Hashem, in front of the new courtyard. What is the new courtyard? They were mechadish something. They made a new halacha. Basically, what we're seeing is that it's only a rabbinic law. It was a new decree that they made. When the people were doing tshuva, they decided they're going to be more strict. One of the things that they said is someone that went to the mikveh, still at Tvul Yom, is not even going to come into Machane Levia. He's a Balkari. Here, this person did go to the mikveh, and Rabbi Yochanan says he's allowed to go in because he has to bring the carbon Pesach, and that is going to push off. That's rabbinic law. Beis HaPras, what's the case of Beis HaPras? A place where there's a grave that was lost or plowed over, and someone was walking there, and he was going to bring his carbon Pesach. Did he become tamei? It was an area that was a doubtful location. The Tanana was started in the Mishnah. Shavin Beishamai, Beisila agree. Shabaitkin Leisi Pesach, that you can check a Beis HaPras. Bein Baitkin Leich Leichuma, but you don't check Beis HaPras. You can check a Beis HaPras for people that are bringing the carbon Pesach, but not for people that want to eat Shuma. My Baitkin, how do you do the Bedika? It says my means what? It means how. How do you do the Bedika? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. Menafech Beis HaPras v'Haila. You take a blower. It would be great if it would be a leaf blower, but over here it probably means with your mouth. And you blow through the dirt that you walked on to see if there was a lost bone that was there. If it blows away, you don't see any bone. So you check his path. He didn't become tamei. He can eat the carbon Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda bar Abaya Mishmeider Rav Yehuda, or maybe it's Rabbi Ami bar Abaya. I'm not sure. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami. Bunch of corrections here. Mishmeider Rav Yehuda Amar Beis HaPras Nidish Star. He says, if it was pressed down, it's going to be pure. What you need to do is check if it was pressed for someone that's bringing a carbon Pesach. Yeah, why does that help? Why does just pressing it help? Maybe it means clearly that there was no bones there. That it was trampled on. Yeah, it must mean that it becomes tar because the bones weren't there. So Hadron Allah Isha. Okay, let's leave it over here. Have a good week.